Attention, brave souls. What you're about to witness might make your heart race. Before the suspense takes over your screen, click subscribe now and hit the like button. Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. But be warned, only the boldest will survive until the end.
Hey, I don't know if you'll believe this, but I have to tell someone. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 28 years old, a freelance journalist and investigator. I've spent most of my career debunking urban legends, exposing so-called hauntings, and proving that the things people fear in the dark are just tricks of the mind. But after what happened in Pennsylvania, I don't think I can do that anymore. I've never told this story publicly. I wasn't sure if I should, not just because it sounds insane, but because, ever since that night, I've had the feeling that something followed me back. This isn't a ghost story. It's not about demons, or cryptids, or some internet creepypasta nonsense. This is real. I need you to listen carefully, because once you hear it, you might start noticing things too. It started in November 2021, a small, forgotten town in rural Pennsylvania, tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains. I won't say the name, because if you have any sense, you won't go looking for it. I was there investigating a series of disappearances. People had been going missing in the woods for decades. Hikers, hunters, even locals. The town had its own legend about it, something they called the Ridge Stalker. The stories were always the same. People heard voices in the woods, familiar voices calling to them. Then they vanished. No bodies, no clues, just gone. Most of the town wouldn't talk to me. The ones who did spoke in hushed, fearful voices, warning me not to go into the forest after dark. I should have listened. Instead, I did what I always do. I looked for a rational explanation. Maybe there was a wild animal responsible. Maybe it was a serial killer. Maybe the disappearances weren't even connected. So I convinced two friends to come with me. Sarah Langley, 30 years old, another journalist tough as nails. Mark Evans, 32, a tech geek, brought thermal cameras, audio recorders, all the gear. We weren't idiots. We had flashlights, weapons, GPS, and backup batteries. We knew the risks, or at least we thought we did. It was 11:47 p.m. when we stepped into the trees. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind, just nothing. Have you ever been in a place so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat? That's what it was like. Every step we took sounded deafening. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant snap of a branch. It was like the forest was holding its breath. We walked for nearly an hour, marking our path with glow sticks, following an old hunter's trail. Everything felt wrong, like the trees were watching us. Then, we found the campsite, tents slashed open, clothes scattered, a notebook left behind half buried in the dirt. I picked it up. The last thing written sent a chill down my spine. It knows my name. A gust of wind rattled the branches, or at least, I thought it was the wind. Then we heard it, a voice, faint, distant, calling from somewhere in the trees. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. I did, but that's not what made my stomach drop. The voice, it sounded like Mark. Only Mark was right next to me. The sound came from somewhere deep in the trees. A voice, soft, distant, just loud enough to make my skin crawl. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. I didn't answer. I was too busy listening, because I had heard it, and it sounded like Mark. Only Mark was right beside me. He turned, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it swept across the trees. His face was pale, his lips slightly parted, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Then, the voice came again. "Guys, where are you?" Mark's voice, perfectly identical, but wrong. I felt my stomach drop. My grip on the notebook tightened. I wanted to tell myself it was just an echo, some weird acoustic trick bouncing through the trees. But the sound wasn't fading like an echo would. It was getting closer. "Who's out there?" Mark called, his voice cracking slightly at the edges. Silence. Then, footsteps, deliberate, moving through the dead leaves, crunching softly in the distance. Sarah swore under her breath. "This isn't funny." I turned my flashlight toward the direction of the sound, my pulse hammering in my ears. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the thick, gnarled trees, but there was nothing. Then the voice spoke again. "Mark, Ethan, I'm lost. Please." My whole body tensed. The way it said our names, it was too perfect. No hesitation, no uncertainty, it knew us. I turned to Mark. His jaw was clenched, his breathing shallow. He knew it too. That's not me," he whispered. Then why the hell did it sound just like him? The wind picked up, rustling the brittle branches overhead. The glow sticks we had placed along the trail flickered dimly in the distance, marking our way back. We could leave. We should have left, but we didn't, because right then, Sarah screamed. I spun around, my flashlight beam jerking wildly, catching only glimpses of her staggering back from the trees, her hands clamped over her mouth. "I saw something," she gasped. "We hear." Mark demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. She pointed, trembling fingers toward the trees. I swung my light toward the spot, my breath catching in my throat, and then I saw it. At first, it looked like just another tree, dark and still against the night. But then, it moved, a figure, tall, thin, too thin. I could barely process what I was seeing. It was like my brain refused to make sense of it. Limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The moment the light hit it, it stopped moving. Completely still, like it had never moved at all. Mark inhaled sharply. "What the hell is that?" Sarah started backing away. "I don't know, but we need to go." And then, it blinked. Two glowing yellow eyes staring back at us from the darkness. My breath hitched. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't, because then, spoke, in my own voice. "Ethan." We ran. Branches snapped beneath our feet. The cold air burned my lungs. My flashlight bounced wildly in my grip, sending jagged shadows whipping across the trees. Behind us, the whispers grew louder. "Ethan, come back." "Mark, wait up." "Sarah, over here." Our own voices, echoing from the trees, but warped, stretched, like a record playing just a little too slow. I risked a glance back, a mistake. Something moved between the trees. Not running, not stumbling, gliding. My flashlight barely caught it. A glimpse of something too tall, too thin, limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. Eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. It was playing with us, hurting us. Sarah gasped, tripping over an exposed root. She hit the ground hard, scrambling to get up. I grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "Keep moving," I yelled. Mark was just ahead of us, breathing hard, looking back, his face twisted in panic. Then he was gone. 1 second he was there. The next the forest swallowed him. "Mark," Sarah screamed, but there was nothing, just the sound of our own ragged breathing, and then his voice, a whisper, far too deep in the woods. I turned, scanning the darkness, my flashlight flickered. "Help me, please." Sarah clutched my arm. "Ethan, that's not him." I knew she was right, but I stepped forward anyway. Then, right in front of us, Mark's voice changed. The words were the same, but now they came from above. "Help me, please." A slow, deliberate, I tilted my head up. There, perched in the branches, was the thing. It didn't climb. It didn't perch like a normal animal. It just hung there, its head tilted, jerked, twitched. It had no mouth, but I swear to God, I felt it smile. Then it dropped. We bolted. The trees blurred. The whispers twisted into something else. Laughter. The ground sloped downward. Our feet skidded on loose dirt. We tumbled, fell, hit the ground hard. Sarah groaned beside me. My vision blurred. My head pounded. Somewhere behind us, branches cracked. Something was coming. I reached for Sarah, pulling her up. My ears were ringing. My flashlight was gone, but the eyes were still there, waiting. We ran. Branches tore at my arms. The cold air burned my lungs. Sarah was just ahead of me, her breathing ragged, flashlight bouncing wildly as we crashed through the trees. The whispers were everywhere now, surrounding us, closing in. Mark was gone. 1 minute he was right there, screaming, scrambling to keep up, and the next nothing. No struggle, just gone. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. I could feel it behind us, watching, waiting, the same way a cat watches a mouse before it pounces. The Ridge Stalker wasn't chasing us like an animal. It was hurting us, driving us towards something. Sarah's foot caught on a root. She went down hard, her flashlight skidding away. "Get up," I gasped, grabbing her arm, but she was frozen, staring past me. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see it, but I did, and I wish I hadn't. It stood just beyond the reach of our dying flashlights. Tall, unnaturally thin, its skin too pale, stretched too tight. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, just watched, and it spoke. Not in its own voice, in mine. "It's okay, Ethan. Just come closer." I felt my entire body seize an ice-cold wave of something ancient and wrong crawling up my spine. My voice, but not mine. The cadence was perfect, the inflection, the rhythm. But there was something underneath it. Something off. Sarah whimpered. I yanked her up, nearly throwing her forward. Rung, we ran. Harder, faster. I don't even remember how far. My mind had collapsed into a single thought: GTOU. The trees thinned. The ground sloped. Then, headlights. A truck. Sarah hit the pavement first, stumbling into the road. I was right behind her. Blinding light, tires screeching, a horn blaring. The driver barely stopped in time. We collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, shaking. I looked back toward the woods, half expecting to see it standing there waiting. But there was nothing. Just trees, silence. It was gone. The driver helped us into his truck, kept asking us what the hell happened. Neither of us answered. We just sat there, staring ahead, waiting to wake up, but we never did. We told the cops what happened. They sent a search team into the woods. They never found Mark. No footprints, no blood, no trace that he ever existed. The only thing they recovered was his audio recorder. When I played it back, I heard exactly what I feared. Breathing. Not his, not ours, something else. Something listening. Sarah and I left town the next morning. We never talked about it again, never went back. But sometimes in the middle of the night I hear it, a voice, my whisper, calling my name.